Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Rocconi. Today is our special guest day, where we will hear from a friend of the ministry who will share their insight and stories on truth in this chaotic world. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Guest Thursday, and we have very special guests. This is part 2 of this fantastic story you guys have been sharing about how you were led recently to experience the beautiful promise of God. Kathy, again, why don't you introduce them, and then we'd love you two to kind of give everybody a summary, an overview of where we went last week, and just briefly tell us how you got to this point, and then we're going to have you share what happened. So go ahead. Kathy, you can introduce your...
Yeah, so this is my oldest son, Joshua, and his wife, Emily, who have been guests on the podcast before. If you missed last week's, you definitely don't want to miss that. No. So go back and tune into that and catch up before you hear this. But they are sharing just a beautiful story of how God has just really led them step by step by step. And they've been faithful to pray, to seek his answers, and to ask, seek, and knock on the process as God has orchestrated this move, and really how God has shown off in the supernatural amidst all of it.
Yeah.
So we've been super excited to have them share this story.
Fantastic. We're all excited to hear how it went. Why don't you summarize what we talked about last week, kind of bring everybody through a little bit of just a brief understanding, so then you can get into the detail of what happened.
Yeah. So kind of quick summary of last episode. Emily and I were living in Delaware. I was in a sales role that covered Delaware and the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Things were going really well for both of us. We were really enjoying our community. Each of us really enjoyed our jobs. Got to spend a lot of time together, really invest a lot in our marriage, which was a ton of fun. It was this really sweet season, but God had spoken years before that we would one day be going back to New Hampshire. And at the time, we didn't know what all that looked like, didn't know the timing of it, but knew that he was drawing our hearts back to New Hampshire, where I had grown up. Emily had been a few times, but didn't grow up there or anything. And so then, starting around March of this past year, God really started, kind of kicking things off faster in terms of moving to New Hampshire. And so there was this whole process, without diving too deep into the details from last episode, of God saying, yep, like this is it. Like we're starting this process. We're going to guys, I'm going to get you out of debt by the end of June, which was something he had promised about a year ago to that point. And we had a significant amount of debt and did not have the funds from an income standpoint to get out by June. But over a year beforehand, he had said by that June, you're going to be out of debt. Fast forward, 10 months from then. And so we're a few months out from that June date, and he says, I'm getting you out of debt by June, and then we're going to hit the ground running for moving you to New Hampshire. And so just in a lot of really cool, sweet, miraculous ways, he got us out of debt at that date. It was actually on my birthday, June 11th. So on my birthday of the month that he said, he called it 14 months out, that we were going to get out of debt. He got us out of debt, and we were officially debt free.
Okay, now wait, stop there a second.
Yeah.
Okay, you said he got you out of debt. You don't have to get into all the specifics, but what kind of things happened that you were actually, because obviously you had to have money to pay that off. What was given to you by God to allow you to do that?
So it was a whole host of things that just never should have happened.
In quantities that never
should have happened. From a couple years before then, money that we had set aside and had saved. I told the story, I think last time or the time before that we were on the podcast, of when he told us to sell the car and how all of that transpired, selling it right before COVID, and we got way more than it should have been valued at, and all these different things that transpired. So we had some money set aside from just really sweet, funny provisions like that from God, to stepping into a sales territory that was not doing very well, but then all of a sudden God's favor was just all over it. instead of doing jobs of little houses here and there for flooring, it was, okay, here's an entire hotel, here's a 10 building apartment complex, here's like these massive jobs.
Favor just continued to fall on you, and you stewarded it. You were working hard.
But I mean, things that we had no business, like from a work standpoint, like I had no business landing some of those jobs. It was nothing that I was doing. It was like, oh, they fell in love with this super specific product that no one's ever bought before, and they're just gonna go for it anyway and do an entire hotel. Like, where did that come from? Like I didn't bring the product up. I didn't talk to them. Like they called one day out of the blue, hey, can you do this hotel? Like just weird
refund
jobs.
from the IRS.
Weird refund from the IRS that like we didn't realize we were eligible for, but got a huge tax refund. Like just all these weird things.
Now, in addition to that, if I can speak in though, at the same time where God is doing all these crazy supernatural things, he's spoken this word and he's spoken to you guys that your part is to steward it well too. And not to live above your means, and to handle things a certain way. And so at the same time, you're being incredibly faithful with both your generosity and your stewardship and your spending, looking ahead to this is what you're saying, and we want to be partnering with you on this. So there was faithfulness on your part as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were really sweet blessings from God in that. I think he taught Emily and I a lot of what it looked like to rely and depend on him financially. But also to go beyond like a desperate, I'm dependent on you, but like a faithful, I trust you in this. Like when we were like our senior year in college, we were married, we had no money. I remember our date budget, $13.
No.
And
it was like $20 a month. Like
20,
that we
had 20,
that we could spend on dates.
It was crazy. And when you factored in everything, it basically came out to like, all right, we can go to Chick-fil-A together once a month. Like that's our date. So that's, to give you an idea of like while we were in college of what we were living off of, that's kind of where we were at. But then I remember times that we'd be in church and, God would we'd be in worship and God would point somebody out and say, hey, like go give this person $100. And we're like, we don't have $100, but like, okay. And so like we'd walk over and like chat with them for a little bit and then tell them, hey, we really felt led to do this. And we'd Venmo them, be like, all right, like we need that $100. So like, we'll see what happens. And actually it was while you and a couple of your friends were down visiting one weekend,
so funny,
we had this happen. So, we give this person at church $100. God said to do it. We didn't have the money, I mean, we had the physical cash, but we didn't, have the flexibility to do it. Okay. Like we're going to do it anyway. Mom and her couple of friends leave, and in the trunk of our car the next day or later that evening or whatever, we find a card from one of her friends that
who didn't know that
who
you
didn't
had
know
just
any
done
of this.
that.
That card basically said, hey, love you guys so much, just really inspired by you, like really enjoyed this weekend with you. Consider this a thank you for bringing us around this weekend. And it was a card and there was $100 bill. There we go. Like and so it's just all these like things that we did nothing to get, did nothing to like earn
But
it.
God was walking with
God was
yes,
faithful.
yeah.
And he showed us, hey, like, if you obey me, I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to, bless you in an overabundance in this, which is what gave us the opportunity to get out of debt so quickly. I mean, it was not something income wise that we would have been able to pull off.
Beautiful. That's, again, a great story of God's supernatural. Here's what I'm going to do. And you can't say, well, let me figure this out. He said, well, you can't figure it out. How about if I just give it to you? That's beautiful. So, okay, so now you're out of debt and you're going into the summer, you're hearing that you're going to move, but you don't have a specific job. How, what happened at that point then?
Yeah. And so there was a role on the sports turf side of our company, so making artificial football fields. And I'd gotten a call from HR about it. And at first, when I called somebody that was in that role, they explained that the New England territory was probably going to be a lot of travel and, listed a few different things that didn't really align with what God had spoken over us for the callings that he had on our lives and within our marriage and things like that. And so really kind of off the bat felt like, we're not supposed to pursue this. We're supposed to set this aside. And so we did, we told him, hey, thanks, but no thanks. And then we moved on, and God continued to very boldly speak, hey, like, that was the beginning of June. And he was saying, hey, we're going to be in New Hampshire in September. And that's what he had spoken to Emily, what he had spoken to Mom. And so then from there, if they can hear that or not, we've got a dog barking in the background. Can you hear that?
No, it's good. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'll try to power through. And so in the midst of that, so in the midst of that, we turned down this one opportunity, and he's saying, okay, like in the next 3 months, you're still going to get to New Hampshire. And so we're stepping into it, wondering what he's going to do, standing firm on that promise, planning fun activities for that fall with my family up here, but having no idea how it's going to come together. And a couple of weeks go by, and I get another call after all these promises had been spoken, not from HR, but from a really good, dear friend of mine within Shaw. His name's Garrett. Believer, loves the Lord. I really trust him a lot, think very highly of him. And he calls me. He's like, hey, man, I heard that you had kind of passed on this opportunity. I really feel like you're supposed to give this another look. Like, I think you should call around a little bit and consider this and then, go from there. And I really trust Garrett. And I was like, all right, like, I'll give it a second look. Like, it's another set of eyes. Maybe I missed something.
Sure.
And so I start calling a couple of people. I'm like, oh, like all that travel that kind of had turned us away from it and made us think that wasn't what God had for us really wasn't, transpiring the way that someone had made it sound like. And there were a lot of really neat aspects about the job that we hadn't been told about. And so I started to get a little bit more intrigued. And Emily and I both kind of felt this tug of like, continue to dig in on this, like not saying that it's what's going to happen, but, keep pressing in. And so then I reach out to my boss at the time and explain to him kind of what we're looking at. And he makes a couple of calls and gets me some video calls with a couple of important decision makers there, and really goes to bat for me. And then Emily and I are sitting there worshiping that morning before the first real call that I had with some of the leadership of that side. I'll kind of let you jump into what you felt and heard.
Yeah. So again, God is just taking me through this season of like, trust my words, even if they sound ridiculous, because we're sitting there worshiping before he's ever had a conversation with any of these decision makers. He's completely unqualified for this role.
Grossly underqualified for the role that I was stepping into.
Not to get the fact that he works hard and is great at what he does, but on paper, he's not nearly as a fit of a candidate as some of the other guys that we knew were applying for this.
Sure.
And we're worshiping that morning, and I was like, getting this sense of like excitement and anticipation. And I felt like the Lord was showing me like, hey, there is good for you here. And I was like, God, am I wrong to feel like you're promising this to us? And he said, no, Em, you're not. And I said, then why are you telling me this before, like we've even had a call? Like, why clue me into that? And I felt like he answered me, and I want to show off. And through, I'll kind of let you take over in a little bit, but through that call and then one other with another key decision maker, God just, oh my gosh, blessed you with so much favor in those calls. Really, he impressed the men that he was talking to, really put, his boss went to bat for him, like he said, but Josh really got the rest of the way through the door in the way that he was just presenting himself. And they were very impressed by his work ethic, the things that he was learning and the education that he had, and were genuinely interested and invited him to be part of the interview process because of his phone calls with them. And I'll kind of let you take over from there.
The first call that I had was with my current boss's boss. And really, really great guy. My boss and his boss are both really great guys. So it's a fun team to be a part of. And so that was kind of off the bat, that was something that was a draw. They're both just good guys to learn under. They steward their team well. But the first call that I had with a guy named Michael, we clicked off the bat, and I could really tell like God was highlighting just like in the specific wording that Michael was using. God was highlighting words that he had spoken to me and over me of promises for the future. So everything was really just lining up sweetly there, which was cool. But in the midst of that, like I got to the end of the call, it's like, man, I'm so excited about this job. And Michael's a good salesperson and everything, so he's gonna make it sound good and all. But I mean, I was like spiritually like just awakened and excited about this opportunity. And I was like, this really feels like this is the right fit. Like this is what God's doing. And so I asked Michael, I was like, hey, be honest with me. What are my prospects here? Knowing that like God was really starting to stir that in my heart. And Michael basically said, hey, I really appreciate you reaching out and having this conversation, but I'll be honest with you, we've got a really, really strong external candidate, and we really don't hire from the side of the business that you come from because they're two very, very different jobs. And, a lot of times we don't see that that really translates. So we want to give you a shot, but don't set your hopes on it and just kind of come in eyes wide open, which I really, respected and appreciated. And so, have that conversation with him, have a conversation with my current boss, who reports to Michael, had a good conversation there, kind of the same, vibe. So really felt like God was stirring in it, but was also aware of the fact that it, from a logic standpoint, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so then let's see. Yeah, so we're going through note cards that we have to try to remember all the, the timeline. There's a bunch of different things that happen here.
The details are what matters because you're so specific in this one.
Right. So the second conversation I had with my current boss, Matt, that conversation ended with, we're going to hold an interview. Like, we'd love to interview you for it. We've got other candidates. They're really strong, but we're going to hold interviews. We'd love for you to be there. And it's going to be like the, August 29th or something, the last week of August. And so I was excited. I was like, great. Like, we got an interview, that's the next step. And so I get off the call with Matt, and Emily and I are talking about it, and we're like, okay, but God said September. And if the interview is August 29th, and then it's, a couple of weeks to make a decision on the candidate, and then a couple of weeks to move, like, that's October. So we go back to God, and we're like, okay, Jesus, like, this is what you said, and maybe this is exactly how your timing is going to pan out, but like, what do you want to say in this? He said, I want you to pray for the interview to come sooner, and then come back and ask again once the interview is set. And so we took, probably a little under 2 weeks. Oh, 2 weeks. So we took a couple of weeks and prayed into that. And then I get a call from my boss, Matt, and he's like, hey man, hope it works for you. But we had some scheduling conflicts come up with a bunch of different people in the interview. We're going to have to move it up a little bit over a month. So we're going to hold interviews like mid to late July instead of end of August. Is that okay? Like, yes, that's okay. And so I got really excited about that. And that's when it, we knew God was speaking these things ahead of time, and making these promises, but that was the first step where we saw him move on those promises. So he said, hey, I'm going to give you this job. Hey, I'm going to give you favor in their eyes. Hey, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. We're like, all right, those are all things that we trust. And then he goes, hey, ask for the interview to get moved up. And it gets bumped a month. And we're like, oh, he's like doing this right now. Like, he is moving. He's very clearly, presenting this to us and giving us this opportunity. And so Emily and I really start pressing in, and we're like, God, like, are you, like, you're saying this is ours. And he, to each of us individually, confirmed, like, yes, like, I promise you, this is the job you're going to have. Again, like, completely underqualified, still going against candidates that are much more qualified than I am, and would do great in that role. And he's telling us point blank, like, yep, this job is yours, I promise you.
And has had to tell us every day, because we keep going, but God, this doesn't make
sense.
And
he's just like beating us over the head. No, this is your job. I promise you, you are getting this job, and you will be in New Hampshire in September. And so finally we're like it sunk in. We're like, okay, like, we're grasping that and like standing firm on that.
Yeah. Not just like tentatively hoping for it. Right.
Yeah. And so for Emily, that happened a little bit before it happened for me. So I'll kind of let you dive into what he spoke, and Bert and everything.
Yeah. So after the initial calls with Michael and Matt, I remember we were kind of deflated a little bit, because in those calls, Josh realized how badly he wanted this role. And in those same calls, he realized how completely shot in the dark this is. But God, and so we were kind of feeling deflated in that. And the Lord warned me ahead of time, and he said, Em, you're going to be tempted to start doubting the things that you've been hearing because of circumstances. But trust that what I said is what I said. Hold on to the promises. I told you I wanted to show off, and it's a lot easier to do that when circumstances look difficult. And so it was just regain faith by the grace of God in that. And it was a long journey of waiting. We found out about the interview about almost a month and a half before it happened. So we've been praying and worrying and not sure what's going to happen for a month and a half, really wanting this role. And the more that we pray on it, the more we want it. And then about a week before the interview, we're at a prophetic ministry night, and our pastor surprises us with like, hey, I want to take the prophetic ministry team into the back where we all sit and just kind of decompress and everything. And he's like, I just want to have some time, just us. And so we all go back there. There's like 8 of us. And we take turns going around the room, giving words for each other to encourage each other, which is such a sweet time. and it comes to me, and Bert, he said a lot, and I didn't get to write it all down because we weren't recording it. I was so sad that we missed it. But the parts that really stuck out to me in the word that he gave me was, go and move forward in strength. I will not abandon you. Know that it's yours. I will do it. I will do it all. Nobody in that room knew anything about what was going on in our world. And this was like a week before the interview. And we were coming back to God of like, we're holding on to promises, but there are times it's hard to believe this for real. And Bert just spoke into that place again of God saying, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Yeah, and had no idea. And we didn't fill him in until after. But he thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so all of that is going on. And then Josh had the interview.
Yeah. And so I fly out to Atlanta late one night, interviews the next morning. And so I'm just spending time with Jesus that morning, or maybe it was, the evening before or whenever. And I'm sitting there, and there were a couple of different things that were cool. One, he just really impressed on me, hey, like I said, like, this is yours. Like, I'm giving this to you. And that's when, for me, for the first time, that I really kind of let any of my like holding back fall away, and just like, okay, like, he's said this over and over. I don't need to guarding your heart is a great thing, but like, God has spoken this so many times that this is not okay, like, I'm going to only half hold on to this promise because I'm scared it's going to break my heart if I don't get it. I was like, no, like, God has spoken this. And so I'm going to grab hold of this fully and trust that I'm not going to be brokenhearted because God spoke this and it's going to happen. And so that happened the night before, where I really, where that kind of fell into place and really clicked for me. And then the next morning I was spending time in the Word, and he reminded me of the story of Gideon. And he was like, see, this is exactly what I'm setting up for you right now. And he had, Em mentioned it earlier. He had said, hey, I'm doing this. I'm, setting up a more difficult scenario so that I can show off, because I want to show you how faithful I am, show you how sovereign I am. And so then in the midst of all this, I'm from the side of the business that they don't like to hire from because it's a totally different side of the job, going up against people that are way more qualified than I am. I was a year and a half into my role, and the Shaw rule is typically you stay in that first role for at least 3 years. Not even so much because of what you're ready for or not ready for, but just for the sake of consistency with the customer base, things like that. And so it just didn't make sense logically to step into this role. And God was like, no, like, this is like a Gideon situation. Like, I'm whittling down your army to these 300, and then I'm going to go show off with these 300. And so then that's what happened. Go into the interview, had a really great conversation with everybody there, left just feeling great about it, not because of anything that had happened, but because God had said it's yours. And so I asked him, hey, what's the timeline look like? I said, well, we're interviewing another guy right after you, and then in a couple of weeks we'll make a decision. So in the next 2 weeks or so, you'll expect to hear from us. So I fly home right after that, wake up the next morning, and 8:00 on the dot, get a call from the hiring manager. He's like, hey man, it's yours if you want it. Like, here's the scenario, here's how it's all going to play out.
Amazing.
And so so the whole, just how fast it happened and everything was wild. It was really cool. And then God's provision in that was so sweet too. Everything from, like, that role, they were taking care of the move, like, everything that we could have thought of that needed to be handled from a logistics or financial standpoint, God took care of. Like,
can I insert real quick? I just remembered as you were saying that, the morning of his interview, my Tuesday ladies group, I get a text. So everybody's praying over this because they're all invested. I've been sharing the story with the ladies as we go, and they knew he was interviewing. And my friend Diane sends me a text, and basically, I don't remember the exact words. I should have pulled it up. But essentially, she said, I was praying over this, and God just told me his favor is completely on Joshua in this moment, and such to the point that they're not even considering the other candidates. And so that was super cool.
Just great encouragement. Yeah. Super cool to hear what God was saying over it. And then 24 hours later, for us to see that come to pass. And then from there, it was, God provided in setting it all up to where the lease that we had signed in February and was going to go for a full year was broken with no issues, and everything was covered there. The move was covered, like, everything that could have come up as a roadblock, God just steamrolled right over and created this beautiful path up here. And so, all that's going on. We accept the role, and then there's a training process for me to train up the guy that's going to step into my role. And he was great. He was a quick learner. We worked really hard together to kind of get all that pulled together. And long story short, September 17th, we drove up here and moved to New Hampshire, and it was the dead center of September, just like God said it was going to be. And
so
it was so cool.
A little bit. So God said that the promotion was coming by the end of the summer. He was offered the job on July 28th. I'm pretty sure was the day you were offered the job. Said we would be there by September, by the fall, we're going to be here for the wedding. All of that came to pass. Like, just the sweetest journey of, hey, Em, like, you've walked with me before, you've listened to what I've said and obeyed before. Let's take it a step further. How much are you able to believe and receive when it gets specific and weird?
Right.
Like, almost, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that was just such a sweet journey for us to even walk through together, of learning how to steward these very specific words and what that means for abiding in it and believing it, but also being open-handed and being open-hearted and ready for what God has for us.
And the sweetness of how he used different pieces and community, different voices. You know, he would share something with me. He'd share something with one of my ladies. He'd share, with Bert. I mean, there were multiple people in community that God used to reiterate these promises.
Whether or not they knew.
And to add layers, whether they knew what was really going on or not.
Right.
Which was amazing.
That's
I
right.
think the sweetest thing for me, I think probably for all three of us, I remember probably 3 or 4 weeks before the interview happened and we got the offer and everything, we were FaceTiming my mom. Emily and I were FaceTiming my mom, and the three of us were sitting there and we're like, man, like, God's never really put specifics on his, like, put a specific date on his promises for any of the three of us. Like, this is kind of new for all of us.
Yeah.
And I remember you and I saying, like, it's going to be really interesting to see if this actually happens or if we are just like completely mishearing. Like, is this something God does? Does he call out specifics, or are we just kind of letting our hearts run with it too much and we're not steering this well? Like, all right, this is going to be an interesting little experiment to see what God does and see if this is how he operates. And we had seen that happen on a much smaller scale, but not something to this, to this level of importance or significance. And so then for all of this to come to pass in perfect alignment with the exact specifics that he gave us, all three of us, well, and Dad, so all four of us, were like, wow, like, this is so cool to see that God speaks specifically. It's not just this generality that you could dumb luck your way into. Like, he pigeonholed himself, said, this is exactly what I'm going to do and how it's going to happen, and then came through. And so it was a really sweet encouragement.
He wanted to show off.
Yeah, exactly.
He really did want to show off.
Yeah. And as we finish with, we're at the end of our time, that everybody, listen to what they just said, is that it gets specific. The key would be that you don't now say, okay, the next one, you need to tell me exactly when.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to go to a purity of what do you got to say about that. So that a lot of times it is just step by step by step. I'm not giving you a timeline. I'm telling you the what. I'm not telling you the when. Sometimes he's going to say, you know what? I'm going to tell you the when. And because you need to understand something as it's coming about, that you recognize something that I'm saying, and there's no system to it. It's just let me speak how I'm going to speak. Sometimes it's that timeline specific. Sometimes it's just step by step. Sometimes, which actually you already heard, you heard 3 years before New Hampshire. Well, he didn't give you a timeline at that point.
Timeline. Right.
He just said something. So
We inserted our own.
yeah, that's right. So how beautiful is this that you shared the fulfillment through faith of nothing logical. It's just let me do it. And then he fulfilled it. And of course, now you're here, and you get to be there, and it'll be fun to see, okay, what's next? And one thing Kathy and I keep telling everybody is that our life with God is not a destination, it's a path. So that even now you didn't say, okay, great, we're here, that's it, we'll just do what we're going to do. And your question now is, well, now what? Where do you want us to go now? What do you want us to do now? What do you want us to be part of now? And it's just continued. So thank you so much for sharing your wonderful story, Kathy. It's exceptionally exciting to receive that beautiful story. I pray everybody understands that's the life of God right there. And we all have the availability to live that out. I would encourage you to pursue it. If you have a question, And even want to get a question to Emily and Josh, send it at AFJ, questions@afjministry.com, and we'll get it to them and either bring them back to talk about it or to share with us the answer. But don't let this moment of what's happened to them be, well, that's unusual for you, but not for me. God says, no, that's the way it's supposed to be for everybody. So we really encourage. Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's beautiful. Kat, yeah. And have a good time and enjoy your Thanksgiving, and we'll see you at the wedding.
All right.
That'll be fun. So Kathy,
thanks so
Kathy,
much,
we'll see you
thanks for
tomorrow.
joining us, everyone. Have a great day.
All right, see you.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.